Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole for April 18th, 2022. I'll now call this meeting to order. With that, our first item tonight, set for 25 minutes, is a Human Rights Commission annual report. We had the Commission Chair Ishan Vajpayee set to speak for that. Is he here tonight?
He is not.
Okay, so we'll have one of the other members speak. So Terry, is that you?
That's me. You want the mic? I got it some way. You got it? Cool.
Set that up for you here.
I guess we're pretty glad that I'm a loudspeaker, huh? Hi. Well, Ishan Vajpayee was going to be doing our presentation this evening, so if I seem a little lost, I am. There he is. So I can go ahead and do it if Ishan is wanting me to, or if you would like to take over.
I would prefer to have the chair give the presentation. Nothing personal.
Okay, good thing I'm ready to go. So I'd say, everyone on the council has a certain level of familiarity with the Human Rights Commission, so I'm going to kind of talk about the changes that have come through in the last year and why I think, as the chairperson who served, I think, an initial 5-year stint, then I went away and came back, and why I think this is going to help serve the community a lot better and position the commission much better to have better visibility and a reputation in the community. So it's been a long process, but I think over the last 2 years, the commission finally made the strategic decision to move away from processing, investigating, and adjudicating claims of discrimination in the community. That was long suggested by Beth Hansen, who was an attorney who worked with the commission for several years. And we kind of clung to it because we wanted to stay relevant. But I think we found new and better ways to be relevant. So part of the reason she suggested we move away from those is that the Iowa Civil Rights Commission grew and grew and grew and became just much more well-equipped to handle those claims. It's the same adjudication process, whether they handle it or we handle it. And so they were hiring law students who couldn't find jobs otherwise and things like that to do what we were trying to do as a lay commission. Now, I am an attorney, but it was very difficult for a lay commission to stay on top of the law, find the time to investigate claims and do interviews, and then write the decisions. So, I personally felt like when we sat in judgment of a claim, you're going to have someone who probably feels a little bit irked in the process, either at the beginning or at the end, depending on the outcome. You might have an employer who feels like they're being targeted. You might have an employer who feels like, or a landlord or something like that, who feels like we're gunning for them and too much in favor of the complainant. And then when you find against the complainant, you're going to have an unhappy customer there too. So getting out of claims, I think, helps us be more of an educational body, more of a resource for both sides of the aisle, so to speak, and not be seen as an advocate for one side or the other. And it allows us to focus on new avenues. So we redid our committee structures a bit, and we've got the Commission Professional Development Education Committee. That is for us to make new membership more seamless and make members more comfortable with their knowledge of skill, and that committee's tasked with internal trainings on topics other than the complaint process and new member orientation. We've got the Outreach and Communication Committee, which is supposed to be listening to the community, promoting our deeds, and I'll circle back to this in terms of some specifics we're doing, but be our sort of communication first responders. We want this committee to coordinate public event participation, create materials, conduct public education events, and then we've been working really hard to come up with some sort of canned language that this committee has the discretion to hear about an incident in the community based on a certain set of rubric we came up with. You know, is it in Cedar Falls? Does it involve a protected class? Is it based on more than just hearsay reported on the media? The real triggering event on this was the Falls water park incident. And we kind of looked back on that as the event. Well, shouldn't we have had some voice in that? Shouldn't the Human Rights Commission have had something to say about it? So we came up with these templates, and we're going to try and, when something like that comes up, just let the community know that we're aware of it. You're heard, you're seen. We're going to information gather and then do what we can to assist in whatever comes of that incident. Just maybe education in a follow-up to it, direct liaison maybe with a business or a restaurant or somebody that was involved in it and try and educate them specifically, or just general community education. So, but just so that people know we're there and we're watching. Then we've got the advocacy committee, which is, since we're not going to help with the claims directly, we still want to have a really robust website, and that's going to take some work. But we want that to be a place for someone to go and give all the information they need to file their complaint with the ICRC or the federal agency if they choose to go that route. Have resources, just try and make that process as seamless as possible, but also provide people a way to leave complaints or feedback about interactions with the city. Maybe something that doesn't rise to the level of a formal human rights complaint, but just something they want us to know about. There was an incident some time ago where a man was busking, and I know that and we all learned that meant basically playing the guitar and asking for some change. Good music, it sounded like, but the private property owner didn't appreciate it, or just didn't want it happening on their property, and someone in the community heard about what happened and thought it was a bigger deal than it kind of turned out to be. And that, fielding that complaint is something that we want to keep doing so we can respond to that individual, educate them, know this person wasn't targeted, this is the law, it's up to the private property owner. We got really good education from Chief Birdie on that helped us understand it better. And I think that resolved very well for everyone involved. So we want to keep that up. And then we've got the executive committee, which is the chair, past chair, and vice chair. And we're working to provide a lot more structure to our meetings and our committee work so that we have our work done timely and we have a more predictable amount of work product so that we're not just popping up with like a flurry of activity during a certain month or a flurry of activity during another month. We're working on having regular proclamation schedules to raise education about certain months and tie that to regular events. And so all of this, I think my personal goal as chair and in kind of spearheading some of this with great help from our staff, Brenda and Bailey, is to put in place structures and processes so that new members can plug in faster and start making an impact sooner, so that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, spending tons of time on training on the law, which we had to do for investigations while we were doing that. We can dedicate that time to more, forward-facing activities for the commission to be seen in a positive light in the community. And again, be able to bring in people faster, have it not be such a steep learning curve, and that will, with increased membership that we got thanks to council's vote, be able to broaden our horizons a little bit, diversify the committee or the commission. So really sorry for being a little bit late, but if you have any questions, now's the time.
Thank you. Open for council.
I don't know that I have any, well, I feel like the question is always good to ask when you folks are here. If there's anything that you need from council or any suggestions for council at this time.
I don't think so. I mean, we've had really good engagement over the last year, more so than in years past, and that's very much appreciated. Committing to adding some staffing resources, additional staffing resources to help us be able to function more like a kind of a normal commission with meeting packets and all sorts of things like that at our ready, increased budget. So I think it's hard to say that that's an exhaustive list and we'll never need anything again, but I think we're headed in a much better direction in terms of council's involvement with us and support of the Racial Equity Task Force, which is kind of a concurrent subject there. And I think as long as we have the support and the financing to be on par with all the other commissions and not kind of a off to the side commission, I think that's all the support we need, and then we'll take it from there. So
I think it's always good to say thank you to all of you folks. I mean, we do have citizen volunteers, and I don't think we can say thank you enough. So thank you for giving your time.
Well, and I want to recognize everyone
Yes,
in the audience.
all of you.
I kind of forgot about that part, but if you're a commissioner, stand, get your round of applause, and Bailey and Brenda, thank you very much too. So, or be bashful and don't get your round of applause. So thank you.
I do have one question or comment. Sorry about that. With the ICRC, the role of that group, every year we receive a contract or an agreement in order to continue our services with them. And as it is now, I believe for last year, Susan Langan, I think, was the chair and had recommended continuing on with ICRC. And so I see that as a very important component of what the HRC does for us, is to provide oversight to make sure that that process is working. And so if you have any concerns with ICRC, or you find that they're not responsive, or there's any questions that you'd want to try a different approach, I hope that you'll feel comfortable with making that recommendation to council so that we can take other action. But as of now, with that recommendation, would you see any changes that are needed with the ICRC relationship, or want us to pursue anything else?
Yeah, I mean, that contract is basically just an agreement about some funding that would kick back to the city commission depending on the number of investigations done. And so if you've ever in years past remember some cities having issue with that contract, that's really when they do like lots of fact finding and they have a full-time staff person and they have a full-time director like Waterloo and they do lots of fact finding. That's where it kind of affects them, because then the rate they get for each investigation actually matters. We're not doing any investigations. We did very few before. That rate really didn't matter. That's kind of the essence of that contract. And I kind of hope that we won't have to make any complaints about the ICRC to you, because it's kind of, that's more state level. So unless you get promoted or something, I don't know what kind of changes will be necessary there. But
Yeah, well, I mean, it is optional to use ICRC. We could have an internal system.
Sure.
Entirely, and that was how we did it before, and changed the ordinance to not do that. But I wouldn't want anyone to think that it's a foregone conclusion that we have to use an outside group. From conversations with council, it was just that we, and as you mentioned tonight in your prepared remarks, it's an efficient system for us as far as we know.
Yeah,
so feel comfortable telling us if you think it should go a different direction. We're really, as a council, I think I speak for council, we're really leaning on HRC to let us know if something's not just or it's not timely.
Yeah.
Because we don't have that same interaction that you have with ICRC.
Yeah,
is my
oh,
understanding.
absolutely. No, appreciate that. So.
All right, any other questions or comments from council? Again, thank you very much for the hard work that's going on. I've been very impressed to see these last couple of meetings, what you're bringing forward, particularly for the first responder communication, like just being able to have messages ready to go. Some great forethought there, and I thank you for your leadership in that.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Okay, with that, I'll turn us over to item number 2, which is the bicycle plan update. We have one of our city planners, Chris Seavey, and civil engineer Matt Tolan, and also the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee Chair, Andrew Schroll, who will be giving remarks tonight. We've got 40 minutes budgeted for this, so we're right on time now and looking at what, a good 40-minute discussion. So the floor is yours.
Thanks. I'm Andrew Schroll. Good afternoon. I'm currently serving as the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and I'd like to just give a brief statement as an introduction to the proposed bike network plan before staff talks. We're excited to be at this point in maturity of the plan to present it to City Council for your feedback and approval. This plan is the result of substantial work put together from city staff, the committee, and public input. As a committee, our mission is to improve the quality of life through safe biking and walking. The more connected our biking and walking are, the more connected we are as a community. In the plan, there's an emphasis on increasing the utility of the network on top of our fantastic recreational trail system. When you hear the terms utility or commuting focus, it doesn't mean just commuting to work or school. It means going to a friend's house, running an errand, or biking to a park rather than driving there. So the terms commuting and utility of the network are then synonymous with simply getting around town. In fact, the original 2009 plan focused on connectivity between neighborhoods and destination areas. This major refresh continues that effort, updating the actionable steps that the city can take. We aim to be practical, aligning with development projects as Cedar Falls grows, and filling in missing parts of the network in existing areas. And in some cases, shared lane markings are included where a route is necessary, but it's not feasible to have a separated trail. Safety is always top of mind. Continuity of the network and intersection improvements are two of the biggest ways to improve safety and remove barriers to entry for riders of various skill levels. One way I think about this is reducing the number of transitions required to get from A to B, such as switching to the road because a trail runs out. We want riders of all ages to feel like they can navigate around town safely and easily on a bike. The goal is to further increase community participation in utilizing this resource. We worked hard to represent the needs of the community of cyclists as much as possible while considering practical trade-offs. We hope that this network is viewed as fitting well with city planning for bikeability and walkability, as well as broader plans such as the Black Hawk County MPO Pedestrian Master Plan. Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor Green and Council. We really appreciate this opportunity to come before you and present this. It's been a long time coming. So I just want to start by talking about why are we doing this update. So the Cedar Falls Bicycle Plan functions as a guiding document for infrastructure planning and is considered in the planning process when streets in the city are slated to be developed, reconstructed, or otherwise maintained. This ensures that opportunities for improving the network are not missed at the point when improvements make the most sense. So the impetus for this update is fourfold. First, there's a lot of love in the community for our bike network, both for commuting utility and for the enjoyment of trails through our nature areas. This pride for the bike network has shown through the entire process that we and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee went through to develop this latest iteration of the plan. Second, it is very important that we keep this plan relevant as a decision-making tool. Third, as you'll see, a regular review of the bike network, such as looking at what's working, what's not, what can be improved, etc. All of this keeps us as city staff tuned into what the public would like these aspects of Cedar Falls to look like. And finally, our city council asked during goal setting in 2019 that this effort be undertaken. And now turn the time over to Matt Tolan to talk about the history of this plan.
Thank you, Chris. Kind of over the next few slides, we have just some graphical representation of the previous maps. But looking back, the city's been evolving the bicycle network plan. Basically from what we looked back was from 2009. There was another update in 2015, and then also with Intercog, there's a 2045 plan established, the MPO bikeway plan that we incorporated with the current 2022 mapping. Also, with the 2045 MPO bikeway plan, that was how we coordinated with the City of Waterloo on connections between cities. And as Chris alluded to, back in December 2019, Council did referral this to be updated. So kind of over the past 2 years, we've been working and developing and updating this current plan that's before you tonight.
Okay. Now I want to talk about the parameters of what we started with for this planning effort. But before I get into it, I did want to give some praise to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, because they deserve a lot of credit. They bore with us through the pandemic and provided ample insight to help us refine this product to bring forward today. As you'll notice, 2019 is a couple years back, so there had been several delays because of the pandemic and other things. So we're really grateful for the committee for sticking with us through all this. The goal, as defined by the committee, was they chose to prioritize the daily commuting utility of the bike network while continuing to enhance the already excellent recreational aspects of the network. Due to complications and costs, we would not consider widening of streets or rights of way. And this will be discussed a little bit later. Staff provided the committee an array of design options for our most common street widths, which provided guidance on what type of bicycle infrastructure would fit on any stretch that they wanted to discuss. We'll also talk about that on the next slide. Putting in bike lanes instead of currently existing on-street parking can be considered. However, prior to such a change, it would require a public process involving notification of adjacent property owners and a vote and approval by this body, by City Council. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee would be responsible for conducting the public process along the street route where it is proposed on the plan. Other aspects, while bikes are allowed on sidewalks in most parts of the city, sidewalks were not considered bike infrastructure for the purposes of this plan. For reference, sidewalks are less than 6 feet wide. Multi-use trails are 6 to 10 feet wide. And for safety reasons are generally only placed along street frontages with limited driveways or cross streets. Multi-use trails through parks and greenways have few interruptions from traffic and are highly valued in the community, but may not be convenient locations for people commuting to work or school by bicycle. And lastly, along streets where more driveways and or cross streets are present, on-street facilities tend to be safer, not always, but tend to be safer for bicyclists and pedestrians, where motorists are more likely to see them. Matt will talk about the design considerations.
Thank you, Chris. So when developing the plan, we had design considerations and also design concerns. Some of the design considerations that we were really focused on were the vehicular travel lanes, the width of the travel lane, depending on a corresponding road width. Looking at the curb and gutter section, a lot of times our curb and gutter is standard at 2.5 feet. but sometimes there are sections where we have an open grate intake just due to drainage and low points in the roadway. Parking, as Chris alluded to, is also a big concern, looking at what the parking amenities are for a current corridor. And if bike lanes were to be added, what would that impact be to the corridor with parking? Also with parking, also have to be a little bit concerned about the opening of a car door. We don't want to create a conflict point where somebody would be opening a car door and a bicyclist in a bike lane. Could be a conflict point. Looking at on-street and off-street accommodations, where we have the availability in the right-of-way to, taking a look at providing a multi-use trail and corridors where there's less crossing points or points where vehicular can't access a good point of this would be like the Mayor's Pedestrian Bridge, where the trail follows non-standard vehicular lanes. And then also looking at bike lane widths of approximately 5 feet in width. That is a standard through AASHTO, through federal design guidelines. Some design considerations. When you update a roadway, there's always a different pool of funding sources that we use. Some of those funding sources, depending on whether it's street construction fund or local option sales tax, limit us into what can be in place in terms of replacing the existing roadway. A lot of times those funding sources don't allow us to acquire or use those funds for acquiring additional right-of-way. A big factor also is just relative pedestrian bike safety from those vehicular lanes in higher speed areas or higher speed corridors, just watching and maintaining those conflict points there. And then just approximate costs is just if we were to add a 5-foot lane per 300-foot block segment, it'd be about $12,000.
Okay, I wanted to go over the process that we went through to develop this latest iteration of the plan. So as a starting point, just for discussion, staff presented an initial proposed plan map to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. This map conservatively represented what staff determined to be the most likely to be built out based on the parameters previously discussed. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee provided their analysis and proposed changes to the map, and we did make some changes based on those. So for plan map version number 2, the map was refined and changed based on that committee input. The version intended for public review was presented to the committee for their vote to move forward, which they unanimously approved. A public outreach questionnaire was created and refined through internal staff discussions and discussions with the committee. Public outreach events, along with a public feedback questionnaire, was provided so the public could give feedback on the plan, map number 2. Staff synthesized and analyzed the data from the questionnaire responses and identified the most prominent requests and recommendations provided by the public. And then for plan map version number 3, in response to public input, staff refined the map with several routes and notes that were reflective of all practical input and feedback received up to that point. This map was presented to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee on February 1st, 2022, where they voted unanimously to recommend that the plan be brought forward for consideration and adoption.
One of the big things that we look at in terms of the bicycle plan is its planning ability. For those who are looking at placing, or we're looking at placing infrastructure on a particular roadway through our annual construction management program, looking at a 2-year turnaround time from by the time we get approval at City Council, execute design, and then execute construction contracts and start construction. So really this document that we'll be using really help us define those in our capital improvements programs, but also with staging with construction timelines. So, for example, this fall, we'll be moving forward for 2024 reconstruction, looking for that approval, and then going into the design phase through this winter into next year, and then contracts around Thanksgiving of 2023 for the 2024 work. So it's really important that we use this as a guiding to us in engineering, just so we can implement those and stay consistent throughout the community.
So to touch on the public outreach events, they were advertised through many different channels, Channel 15, flyers, posters, a press release in the Courier, and different social media outlets. Those events were held at the farmers market and the public library next door. The questionnaire was open for 3 weeks and garnered 430 responses, which we think is pretty impressive. What's even more impressive is that much of these open response questions, much of these were open response questions, where we asked about things like unsafe areas and routes, connectivity issues, practical problems, and potential practical solutions, factors that discourage biking, factors that encourage biking. And most people took their time and gave a lot of thought to the direction they were giving us. I'd like to emphasize that no response was taken lightly through this process. To give an idea about the profile of respondents, most were residents of Cedar Falls, but about 17% were from areas adjacent to us, which is not a bad thing to have their input as well. It brings people to our town, and that's great. Almost half were above the age of 40, and the vast majority were above the age of 25. Here are some tidbits from our open response questions. We had a good mix of users, though most identified themselves as recreational bicyclists. Plenty of automobile commuters in here as well. Almost 90% said they would use a trail if it was between their home and their most common destinations. 63% said they would use a bike lane if it was between their home and their most common destinations. So 90% trail, 63% bike lane. There is a clear preference for trails over bike lanes from questionnaire responses, as 87% prefer trails over bike lanes. Looking at the plan, you'll notice more trails than bike lanes, and that is on purpose. This is an interesting one. In Cedar Falls, would you be able to make do without a car? 17% said they could, which is fairly impressive, even with what's not yet built out. If that goes up, that's not a bad thing. So now we want to talk about the changes that were made to create this latest iteration. I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Tolan to discuss those.
Thank you, Chris. So we had 6 main areas that after public comment, we went back through, updated, reevaluated, kind of those 6, and we'll dive into this in the next few slides more in detail. But the east-west connectivity with the First Street reconstruction, taking a look at providing bicycle amenities. The First Street project that was completed by the DOT included sidewalk infill and extension through the corridor between First and Franklin, but looking at providing bike amenities. Hudson Road consistency, that's extension of trail on Hudson Road, but also looking at providing continuity through there. There is some jogs through there where you have to cross Hudson Road or cross different areas or go around the Unidome. So looking at that consistency. University Avenue loop with Union Road. There's a lot of public comment on Providing the loop roads, we currently have one loop. We're in construction of our second. This would be the third. And then Cedar Heights Drive south of Viking Road. So we have our existing roundabout at Viking Road. This would be connecting southerly to adjacent to John Deere PEC and then also into Waterloo. And then lastly, Round Street, just looking for that continued connectivity southerly as that develops in the future. Before we dive in, for those who have maps at your desk, just a quick, brief overview of how to read the map. Throughout the map, there are controlled intersections that are marked, but the big things we want to focus on are if it's red, it's trail. If it's blue, it's bike lane. If it's light green, it's a shared lane, or commonly referred to as sharrows. And then dark green is a paved shoulder. If it is a solid line on the plan, that means it's currently in place. It's currently in our infrastructure. If it's dashed, that's what is proposed. So taking a look at 2nd Street, kind of diving into it. So there was, after the DOT project, that roadway did widen from a 4-lane section out to a 5-lane. Sidewalk was added. There was some sidewalk infill on the north side. But the community felt there was still need for bicycle facilities, especially down to the 2nd and State area. So 2nd Street is a wider street. It's wider than our typical 31-foot street. It does have the ability in the future, as we develop that corridor, to switch to bike lanes, so dedicated bike lanes on the roadway. It is a lower volume street than First. First is a state highway, so that would be a great transition. And then also it leads straight into the downtown corridor from Hudson Road Trail. Next is the Hudson Road update. So looking at just continuing the connectivity, so south of University Avenue, we have developments that are still progressing southerly. We also have other trail segments through there. It was desired to make that as part of a utility to the community by providing that southerly connection, but also addressing some other areas like at 18th Street or adjacent to the UNI track and field. There is a section of trail that continues southerly, but then transitions to a sidewalk zone, and you have to backtrack to 18th across and go around and down adjacent to the UNI Wetland Park. So looking at addressing those as that corridor updates in the future, and making those connections down to where we currently have trail stubbed in with development down south of Technology Parkway. University Avenue update. So this would be the 3rd loop. Currently, the first established loop is 1st to Union to 12th. Currently, we're wrapping up construction of the Union Road from 12th to 27th. And then tonight, a public hearing is the West 27th Street construction plans, which will include a new trail segment coming from Hudson Road west to the limits of the new high school. So that would be the 2nd loop. But there's also interest in adding possibly a 3rd loop. That would be Union Road from 27th to University, and then University looped back in where we have other trails more to the east adjacent to Hudson Road. Excuse me. We did add a note to the map in this location. Fortunately, right now, that section of roadway of University Avenue is a rural cross-section. It does provide some challenges as far as the drainage for the ditches on either side. So right now, we're currently have it shown as as a paved shoulder with transition to a trail as that develops. Those areas are improved and switch from rural to urban. Round Street extension, and then looking at the Pinnacle Prairie Master Plan. This would be the area north of Viking Road, kind of northeast of what would be Menards. Taking a look at, there's a master plan in place with the Pinnacle Prairie master plan that shows the extension of trails through there. Some along roadway networks, some behind in waterway features and other areas. With that recent update with the master plan, we incorporate that into the plan and also show the extension of trail from where it stops in Menards, continuing with where we'll stop the Cedar Heights Drive reconstruction project. Cedar Heights Drive update. This is similar to University Avenue, so this would be an extension southerly from our existing roundabout, looking to make that connection to John Deere PEC, but then also Waterloo. We did have a conversation with the city engineer of Waterloo about this. The plan that we are presenting is consistent with the 2045 MPO plan, where it would be a paved shoulder south of Viking Road, as it currently is in a rural section. When that corridor updates or improvements are made to that corridor, we did add a note to, as development allows, to add a trail segment through there to take it from on-street to off-street accommodations. Real quick, it's always great to have a plan, but it's even more awesome to see it in action. So I've got a couple slides here just talking about where we at for 2022 and kind of the next 5-year outlook. So currently in 2022, we have our new industrial park that's currently in construction. They're mass grading. That project itself will have a trail that's integral with Viking Road that I'll get to next year in 2023. Union Road Trail, that will wrap up. That's the current trail project under construction from 12th to 27th. And then currently we're in construction of the Cedar Heights Drive Trail. We'll bring trail down south of Green Hill Road. 2023, Main Street reconstruction will have bike lanes. Ridgeway Avenue reconstruction will have trail accommodations as that is extended through there. And then Viking Road reconstruction, where we reconstruct Viking Road west of Hudson Road through and up to the new industrial park and connecting into the industrial park trails. 2024, taking a look at the Creekside Technology Center. These would be the two fields located south of Hudson Road, or I'm sorry, south of Ridgeway, either side of Hudson Road. There are trail integrations planned for that. As development occurs, that would be extended along with the existing trails throughout that network as development occurs. Aldridge School Elementary connection, as we start to make those connections, that would continue up to the Green Hill Road extension to the north to connect to the school. And then Union Road Phase 1 is currently designed. It's been on the shelf ready to go for 2024, and that would be the start of that third loop. And then kind of looking into the crystal ball, but it's in our CIP, so looking at Grand Boulevard Trail infill. This is a section that used to be a part of the old trolley system, kind of bridging Grand Avenue going to the east. And then the Highway 58 and Green Hill Road, as that intersection's improved, as the DOT allows for funding, those improvements would be made to help cross that intersection there with Highway 58.
Okay, and just to wrap up real quick, I did want to talk about where we are in the schedule for this. We discussed this recently in the Planning and Zoning Commission on March 23rd, and also on the 13th of April, just this past week. The March 23rd was a more public event that was advertised and was meant to draw public comment, which it did. Today we're bringing this forward for discussion and to answer any questions you may have. Assuming there are no major concerns, this should be on the May 2nd council agenda for your vote and adoption. And I'm going to turn the time over to, Mr. Schroll to finish up this presentation.
Thanks, Chris and Matt, for all your efforts in putting this together. Just a closing quick comment. We did approve this unanimously. I think P&Z did as well. We feel that we're at a point in maturity with this where it's a good time to say, this is where we're at. Of course, we always feel like there's more we could tweak, right, and keep talking about. those opportunities, I think we can continue to take those. We want to keep discussing and interacting over time, even if it's another 7 years before we refresh this again. So looking forward to what questions and comments you have at this time.
Okay, thank you very much for the great presentation. I'll start us off with a question. It notes at the bottom of the map, gridded street connectivity network, and that's in gray for the downtown area. Can you describe what that really means and how that factors into your thinking?
Yes. So the gray area is considered a bicycle-friendly zone. It tends to be very low traffic, because of the amount of connectivity that it has. Several different routes that cars and/or bikes could go. Residential streets tend to be, or the low traffic and low speed residential streets tend to be a great place for bikes to ride, regardless of whether it's marked or not. So it's the bicycle friendly area of town.
Okay, great. Other questions from council?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll get this a little closer. I did speak a little bit on a topic at the Planning and Zoning, and Andrew, I did get your email, but I didn't have a chance to call you, so I apologize for that. But the thing I was concerned at, and Mr. Mayor, your comment hit on it a little bit. It's the 12th Street and 18th Street thoroughfares between Main and Union. They tend to be a little higher traffic areas, and we're putting shared lanes down those two streets. I realized that you kind of had a heat mapping system, I guess, to spy on people when they're biking. Is that kind of different ways to look at it? Can you explain that a little bit? I'm kind of curious how that comes to be.
Sure. So what I shared with Daryl over email, and I'm happy to share with others as well, was just some imagery from a popular app called Strava. So many people who use GPS watches in the area or nationwide or beyond, recreation activities, running, biking, other things, you record the route you did, and then afterwards it says where you went, how fast you went, and if your watch is fancy and has heart rate, stuff like that, you can put that together for your own fitness. And it's kind of a social app as well. One of the big things that is part of Strava in particular is particular routes and understanding where others are going is part of the social nature of this recreation app. And so they've just made this available relatively recently. I had a preview of it in the Iowa Bicycle Summit just before COVID in early 2020. And so it was like you pay a lot of money for it at that time, but now it's just kind of available if you're a member. And so what this heat map shows is a density of traffic wherever that traffic is. And you can filter by running and walking or by biking. And so the map really shows a lot of traffic on 2nd, 4th, 8th, 12th, 18th, yearly, and 23rd as the east-west connections between Main Street and Hudson. And so while I agree with you, Daryl, that it would be great if we could kind of keep bike traffic off of 12th and 18th or keep it separated, like with a separate trail along those roads. We just don't really have the ability to put in a trail with the number of cross streets and driveways on those roads. And there's no other through streets between Main and Hudson from, I think, 9th down to 22nd or something like that. So it's not ideal, but the thing is the traffic is already there. So if we try to put Sharrows adjacent on, say, 11th and 17th, that's not going to actually remove the bike traffic from 12th and 18th. So since the traffic is already there, we just want to help drivers be aware that bikes are going to be on this road because it's a through street. So that's really what becomes the purpose of the shared lanes.
It was interesting at the Planning and Zoning meeting, someone else spoke and their frustration with drivers who don't recognize that the bike has the right to be there. And Director Birdie, my understanding is all the streets in the city are eligible for a bicyclist to be on except something over 45 miles an hour, like the freeway?
Yeah, that would be accurate, except, yeah, there's certain roadways that would prohibit bicycles from being on them.
Right. So it'd be nice possibly for those people that are a little slower bikers, the social bikers, to highlight, 17th Street, for example, from Main over to College, drop down to 19th, and have a little lighter green line or something to say, hey, there's an alternative if you don't like the car wishing past you on 18th, or the person that yells at you, get out of the road, And I've done a lot of biking, and I've heard that many times. I've been run off the road by unfriendly vehicles a number of times, and it'd be nice to have a little bit of an option there outlined possibly for the person that's a little more concerned with that traffic. And it can get kind of fast on 12th and 18th.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's definitely one of the challenges is just education out there on being nice as a driver, being able to use the left paddle instead of the right one for a second. You also highlighted that there's a wide range of riders out there. There's families with really young kids and, in some cases riding actually on the sidewalk, or ideally the multi-use trails is going to be best for them. And for somebody who's out for a big workout, trying to, get out to the countryside, get out of town, being on the road is kind of more their home. So that's definitely one of the challenges, is having this complete network that accommodates a wide range.
Another quick question. You mentioned the curb and gutter drain grates. I'm assuming, in particular, the trails and the shared lanes, that the grading is cross to the bike, or so you don't have the bicycle wheels falling in. You run into that a fair bit on Ragbri when you go into little towns where all of a sudden you got your chin on the ground and you broke your collarbone, because that's a pretty common injury in biking.
Yes. So as far as our street intakes, we switched to a vein grate style of intake, which is a little bit different. It doesn't have slots. It has kind of a curved orifice and a random pattern on it that is bike friendly. It doesn't allow a tire to get caught in that. More of the comment with the casting or the actual curb and gutter width was more in relation to just trying to provide bike facilities that won't even cross a grate, just so it stays on the PCC or HMA surface.
And then railroad tracks are another deadly, not bike friendly item.
Yep. So always when bikes or facilities are crossing railroads, we always want to cross orthogonal or a 90-degree angle, just so we don't have that conflict of sight. So that's always something we're looking at, especially with trail connectivity through there. That's always something that we look to address, and if there is a concern, look to update that.
Thanks.
Thank you. I do want to say thank you so much for using the Strava app and the data in that. It's incredibly helpful, and we find more and more tools available to give us good insight for public policy. We continue to adopt those very assertively. And I would want to note, too, it's not that Strava spies on you. It only provides or takes information that you've agreed to provide to the app. So we wouldn't be just drawing data without user consent. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Sanders.
I got a question for Matt. The 27th Trail, you're looking to do that in 2024?
The 27th Street Trail is only going to go from Hudson Road out to the westerly extent of the school site currently, and then we have a on-street to off-street conversion. Currently, 27th Street has bike lanes, and then as it continues to the county to the west. So the trail won't continue. The trail section will stop on the westerly leg of the high school site, so it won't connect to Union at this time.
When will it connect to Union?
We would have to establish that in a project.
I was just thinking it would be nice, since that's going to be closed, if they put in the roundabouts to do it at the same time all the way down so it wouldn't block traffic. That's all. Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know that's a question, but again, thank you for giving your time, the volunteers that give their time and insight to this. I do feel like it's an incredibly important thing as a person who's concerned, along with, I'm sure, my fellow council members, about attracting people to live here. I went to a League of Cities meeting a couple weekends ago, and the hot topic is even if you're a growing city, which Cedar Falls was lucky to grow in the last census very minimally, your retirees leaving the workforce are very much a higher percentage. So to me, things like our bicycle network, not just for recreation, but for connectivity, is incredibly important because the younger folks do think like this. And I know this because I'm lucky enough to work with younger folks. And these things are incredibly important for many reasons, but for that reason in particular. So thank you for your thought. Thank you for your work. Thank you for, your expertise. I appreciate it. I'm sure our council members appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. And as we move forward into having the established Great American Rail Trail coming directly through Cedar Falls, there is that risk that our bump out toward the top would get side cut by Shawless Road, that bicyclists would have an incentive just to go and bypass us and continue on their route. These sorts of amenities and additions certainly help us to retain that sense that we want bicyclists to be in Cedar Falls. We want the national travelers to stay overnight and to take advantage of Cedar Falls, and that we appreciate their traveling through. So this is a great way to move forward on that. Anything else from council?
I just
Yes.
wanted to ask thanks for their persistence through this project. Obviously, it predates me, but I would second Councilmember Dunn's sentiments. Very much thank you for your continued work on this. It's obviously one of the great amenities that we have here in Cedar Falls. So thank you for your work, and looking forward to seeing it continue.
Thanks. And Councilor Schultz.
So I can say thanks as well, but I also, to the point of, it's a culture change, going from a recreational or kids riding their bikes to school to having this as a primary part of transportation. Growing up in Iowa, it was always a little different, bicycling, around the calendar all year round, but there are people that are starting to do that. To the question to Director Birdie now for currently, that this is no pun intended, a two-way street, right? Oftentimes we see bicyclists they're aggressive towards cars, and unfortunately, and we also see bicyclists that seem to are fine with the guidance for where the trail is or what the rules are until they get to a stoplight, and their interpretation of a bicycle stopping at a stoplight is stop and go, right? Where, so having that cultural education, I think, is important as well. There's a couple of things on the map that I had questions about that I was curious if there was a thought put in. We're fortunate enough to have Lake Street being a part of the joining of this here coming up, and in the future going down Longview in North Cedar. I've had more than one person that has asked me if there is consideration on the Center Street to extend that from the river to Longview, and to make a safer crossing over to the Center Street. So at Cottage Row and Center Street is where that currently exists, and it's right on a curve. And the view for the bicyclist to be able to do a crossing there is more of a safety concern. So if you maybe look at that. Again, I've had opportunity to really spend more and more time talking with planning and zoning, so having their endorsement of this plays a huge role for me as well. And going back to historical, it's good to see that we're looking to Product Engineering Center and the Engine Works and access to those. And you've discussed, or said you've discussed, I guess, Matt, about having conversations with the engineers in Waterloo. Ridgeway is certainly very highly traveled and a concern for, the expansion of bicycle traffic down that corridor. So I look forward to us making that a safer route between the two cities. But those are, I guess Dave asked about the other one that I was wondering about. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, Councilor Cruz. Closing comments, sir.
Okay, thank you. I think possibly this might be a question more for Brian Heath. And how much of this trail over time do we evaluate for use in the wintertime for clearing for biking, but yet at the same time we want to keep the cross-country skier and the snowshoer and maybe even snowmobile trails, or whoever wants to answer that?
Brian can add to this if he likes. One thing that we try to do as these different volunteer organizations in the community, there's quite a few nonprofits like Cedar Valley Cyclists, Cedar Valley Association for Soft Trails. We have a certain amount of coordination going on, including with this DNR, this state park in George Wythe, on what trails we establish as cross-country skiing in the winter and what we want to try to get cleared. And so one of the things that we're planning on doing this year as a committee is reviewing the snow removal plan that we have currently, seeing if there's anything to adjust there. But we really appreciate what Public Works has done over the last couple winters to clear stuff so that people can have that option of continuing to get around town in the winter. So it's really focused on, in town clearing and then leaving areas like Big Woods, Riverside Trails, and George Wythe for the cross-country skiing, and leaving Prairie Lakes as well for the recreation.
So I guess I haven't noticed or even looked into it, but I'm assuming you have a winter map for the trails to describe what you just showed? Like the snowshoe friendly or the skiing versus the clearing?
To an extent, there's our focus, at least in working with Public Works, is looking at what gets cleared. And I'm sure that if it's not there, we can make that available with the area organizations on where exactly that winter map is. And actually, one thing worth noting is Intercog is putting out an interactive map. They're planning on releasing it in the next few weeks here, I believe. And so that'll be a good resource for us to link to as a city and as the various organizations to try and say, hey, here's a common spot to go interact with the trails that are out there. And I think that's a good idea to incorporate, the winter activities aspects.
So where does snowmobiling fall in city limits? That might be Bertie's question there. Can you, like if I own a snowmobile, can I, from my house, go out to the country trails legally? Or as long as I'm on the shoulder, off the road?
I'd have to take a closer look at the ordinances, but if there's a large snowfall, it's very common to have snowmobiles that move around some of the main roads in town. And so I'd have to look at the ordinances closer. I can tell you my 3 decades, we have not had a problem with that. But in large snows, there are definitely snowmobiles that use the roads.
And then the trails as well. I mean, the trails would be a lot of fun for a snowmobiler.
The trails are not open to snowmobilers.
Okay, even in a snowstorm scenario?
No.
Okay.
And we don't have snowmobiles that use the trailers.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you follow these organizations he's talking about, that is a big no-no. It's not safe.
Okay. I would also want to ask, too, for Northern Iowa Student Government, if there would be an opinion from your group on this. Any concerns with the plan going forward? Okay, nothing for now, he says. All right. Keep us posted. All right, well, if nothing else for this, I want to thank the committee for your excellent work on this, and I look forward to seeing this come forward to City Council for receive and file. And that'll turn us over into the public safety model study. We're looking at funding sources tonight. We have 40 minutes set aside from that, and Mr. Gaines had let me know that he has a personal obligation tonight, so Jennifer Rodenbeck will be covering for this tonight to discuss the funding sources, and I will certainly now turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, ma'am.
So I think thought we'd just start off by just maybe kind of reminding what the referral was that was made on March 21st. So this is just right out of the minutes. It was moved by Ganfield, second by Harding, to refer to the committee of the whole a presentation of possible funding sources up to $125,000 and at least 3 consulting firms, including Community Security Solutions, for the public safety review. We really came here tonight thinking we would focus on the first part of that motion, because it seemed like there's no reason to go to the second part if we're not going to decide on the first part. So that was really our thought for tonight. And I think the other thing before we get to what some options might be for funding is, I think after and having some discussion amongst staff, it was kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, is now really the right time to do a study? And really that was about, one, we're right in the middle of public safety director hiring that. So is it kind of nice to just kind of get our team set and get all that going first? And really the second thing, maybe, I don't know if it was more important or not, but is we just passed our FY23 budget. So for us, it was kind of, okay, so now do we step back and rehash the items we just rehashed about the FY23 budget? Or does it seem like that's not really the good timing when we just passed that and we did all that? And so, we were talking about, really, would the timing be better to wait until this fall to talk about doing a study, as we're getting ready to develop the CIP, the budget, and all that thing at goal setting. So that was just kind of our first thing we wanted to just talk about as a little background to the presentation tonight. Now, in saying all that, obviously I think that's, for you guys to discuss and determine if now is the right timing. But one of the things we talked about then is, if we're not going to go back and talk about the items we just did with FY23, what are some other things in the FY23 budget we could talk about that the funding could come from, the $125,000? One thing, obvious choice, is we could talk about emergency reserves. And as all of you know, we have a goal of this council is to get our emergency reserves between $1.5 million, and actually a goal was to get it closer to $2 million. And over this past year, we've been able to do that. Now, we have more cash in that fund, but we have $2.5 million committed on the CIP to 3 projects. So that's why we get down to the $2 million, which I think was a goal of council. But obviously, that could be a place we could look at. Another thing is we talked about is, if this is a public safety expense and this focus on public safety, would we want to look at the public safety budget for FY23, and where could we find $125,000 or whatever in the public safety budget? Well, as we've talked about many times, as all of you know, the public safety budget really is a lot about personnel. And if you're going to take something out, it's probably about personnel. So one of the things we talk about is, we could, when there's a vacancy, not hire that position for public safety officer, and it's about $100,000 cost. So that's one option to talk about. Another option we can talk about is contingency. Every year in our budget, and we've had this for a long time, is a $60,000 contingency line item. And really over the past years, what that's covered is, things like we have to have a runoff election that we weren't planning on, or a special election we weren't planning on, or maybe there's a legal issue that's going on that we haven't been able, we didn't have enough in our legal fee line item to cover. So those are the kind of things that the contingency line item covers. So obviously one of the things we could do is commit that $60,000 to this, and as the FY23 year went along, obviously we would know we kind of don't have that to fall back on in terms of some of those things. So so that was one of the other things we wanted to put on there. And then obviously the other one is we could go back and talk about all those things we talked about with the FY23 budget again. I'm not sure if that's really the most efficient place to do it, but just because, again, you've already talked about that, had a lot of conversation about that, and you kind of already voted what you want to do on that. So that's, I guess, where we are in terms of the funding sources. So at this point, Mayor, I think it was really just to leave it up to council to talk about what maybe the next steps are.
Sure. So open it for council to talk about pros and cons of, if you could bring up that slide again that was just up, talk about those couple of options. Those are the main approaches. So
This one, I'm sorry, this one?
no, the one that has the different funding sources.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Essentially.
the one I was on. Okay, that one.
There we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, so open it for council, just initial discussion. Councilor DeBoer.
Well, I don't think we ever really talked about what the scope of this study would be. I've heard different things as to what they've talked about. But wouldn't, depending on what the scope is, be the difference on how much funding you need for it? So don't you have to start with that?
Yeah, I agree. I think, as we all know, the scope is going to drive how much something could be. Obviously, the more things you want in the scope, the more expensive it's going to be. So, yeah, I agree. I think you would have to do the scope and parameters.
But isn't one of the reasons we went to in this direction is if we're going to even have the funding to do it? I mean, I feel like it's kind of a back and forth, right? It's like, I mean, I agree. We need to figure out what we would want, but first we have to figure out where we're going to get the money, what we're going to take from.
Right, it really does feel kind of like a chicken and egg problem. So it helps to know, to define even what our scope can be based on how much money council's willing to invest in it. Is it whether it's $10,000 or $100,000, that's going to tell you what your scope will get you. So you do have to have sort of that initial sense as part of this.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Cyrus.
I think we should take it out of the emergency fund for the reason that our public safety and our police are so important to our community. Our safety of our community depends on all these things. We're already throwing, I don't want to say throwing away, but we've already committed $2.5 million out of our emergency fund. I think that's a tremendous amount, and when you look at $2.5 million against $125,000 for something that if we have someone come in who are truly experts in the PSO field, this could truly be beneficial to our city. It's the benefits that we're going to get from this study, and to make the scope of it smaller to save money, this is not the time. Sometimes you can conserve and save money on different things. You can postpone it a year. I always go back to my own experience in manufactured housing, and this will be very quick. They changed over and had the fire marshal's office come and inspect us, and I said, come in and look at whatever I do. I'm good at what I do. And after they came in and looked, that inspector from the fire marshal's office for the next 20 years called me when he had an issue, and he would ask me what I thought. Now, I'm an expert in my field, and I'm glad that we can hire experts to come in and look at the PSO system in our community, whether it's the police side, the fire side. I think they can also do all kinds of different things with our employees, because we've had a tremendous amount of loss of employees. I know everybody likes to blame it on me because of the one issue I had with an engineer, but it's not me. I treat my employees very good.
I'd ask if you please keep it relevant to the topic.
Yep, that was it.
I have one question for Councilmember Ganfield. You had brought it forward as the motion and had put the $225,000. Was there something that led you to target that rather than 50 or 150?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the specific verbiage of being up to $125,000 is something that I would want to reiterate. I certainly don't have a $125,000 price tag on something I'm looking to buy. This was an opportunity for us to have this discussion to see if there were possible funding sources. I had a conversation with, I believe, one of the managing partners of community services, and they gave us a number that was significantly less than that $125,000. And I would almost be okay with looking at that $60,000 in contingency as an option to move us forward to start developing scope if we needed to do that. Part of the reason we didn't develop scope and parameters for this project was because we don't want to tell them the solution we're looking for. We want to have them investigate our blind spots. We as a community are not unlike us as homeowners. We become house blind to what we're used to, and we may not see some areas of opportunity, and we may not even celebrate some strengths that we could capitalize upon. So I think it's a good idea to have an outside entity who has some portfolio experience to say, hey, we've had success in helping just that, find deficiencies and capitalize on strengths in a community. To Councilman Sires' point, it would be wonderful if we were looked to as a model to replicate around our community. I think that'd be great. And I can't imagine the travesty that would happen if we did have something happen in an area that we were house-blind to. If we had a blind spot that we didn't take care of, it'd be a problem. I've heard some concerns with our EMS response, and I'm not trying to insinuate that we're looking for problems so that we can come in and dismantle or do anything in that regard. And this is simply the starting point. My first month on council, we talked quite a bit about, well, we can always find $100,000 here or there to put funding back in for a certain, item. Where did that sentiment go? I mean, if we're trying to find less than, most likely, $100,000 here to make sure that our citizens are safe, the level best, safest community around, that's fantastic, and I think it's worth finding that money for this. So I don't think it's fair to say, is this the right timing, from your seat. I think we're trying to find out possible funding solutions. So I appreciate you, Jennifer, bringing that information. I would say I'm good with a portion of this potentially being designated out of contingency, and then any excess that would need to be pulled for whatever we choose to do in that next meeting to come out of emergency funds.
Well, one thing with contingency fund is, that's the whole point, is there's a force field around it just in case something weird happens we didn't expect. This, I feel like it's more predictable, or something we can account for ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that's something I would want us to consider as part of that emergency reserve, and that the council's allowance was to go down to 1.5, but not less than that. So.
Yeah, so
Starting.
that's kind of good segue into what I was going to say. Basically, we're trying to find funds. We do have to Councilmember DeBurr's point, if we're going to do this, we have to have a little bit of scope. We want to leave it open. So to get there, basically, it was 2019, we were around a 1.5 million-ish, and we said, let's bump it up. We're close to 2 million now. I don't know the number. I don't want to start throwing numbers out there, because then, people will say, oh, that's the number they have. I think just a consensus that if we're going to move forward with this, we can use the emergency reserve fund based off of, grab and use that, and then allow staff to replenish it at their discretion as they see fit to, to put money back. So I would like to leave the contingency there just for that, in a contingency. This is something that hopefully we won't have to use a contingency money, but if it's there, then it's good. Definitely don't want to see one less public safety officer, so I would not be in support of that, and I don't want to rehash the CIP items or to discuss budget. So my thought is, let's get approval on using the emergency reserve fund, and then scope and continue pushing forward.
Well, something we can add to that too with the contingency fund is, if it's not used for this next fiscal year, that could be part of what goes back to replenish emergency reserve.
Yeah.
That'd be a better way to
Set that-
phrase.
yeah.
I appreciate that.
Councilor DeBoer.
Well, none of these three funding sources are acceptable to me. I don't think it's appropriate to use any of those. But I am wondering, since Jen, you talked about timing, if we were to wait until the public safety staff with the director and the chief have gotten in place, and we've had the employee survey they've talked about doing, as we kick this down the road, if we got to goal setting and we do budget reconciliation, would there possibly be other areas that have opened up with funding because we didn't use as much as what was funded? I know it has to be what funding source it is, but is that an option if we just waited a while?
Sure. I guess the good thing about goal setting is usually about halfway through the year, if you're doing it in November. So, we might have ideas at that point, whether we've even used the contingency money at that point. So we would be halfway through a year and might have identified, how some of our revenues are doing. So yes, that would be an option.
And then it would also give us an opportunity to see if this study is even needed.
Right.
I'd like to throw a thought out there that Susan kind of
Councilor Cruz, please.
triggered my my thinking. We mentioned the employee survey. I think that would be an incredibly good item for the people we might hire to have that information. So doing the survey first, go through that, get feedback from the current PSOs, and if we expand the survey to the rest of the city employees, then use that information along with what could be done in the future. So, and then from that, then we find the funding sources. Now, the employee survey, was that, how much money was allocated to that, if I recall?
So we have 10,000 in this year and 10,000 for FY23 to do the survey.
And that starts 1st of July?
Yep.
Okay, so 20,000. I'm thinking along the lines of what Susan is saying here, that we should do the employee survey, which gives us valuable information for someone to use to look on into the future for a study.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I will echo both of those sentiments of the two previous speakers. The thing about the emergency reserves, there should be a reason to kick in or dip into emergency reserves. And during this continued discussion for years and years and years, there's not been actual data. There's been hearsay and information put out there that isn't necessarily well, it isn't true, but we've never had data to actually spend citizens' money on something and review it. We have had the conversation at goal setting about the special report, and tied into that, I think we've all talked about the importance of this employee survey and getting a idea of how the people that actually do the job feel about the program. One thing I will say, that when we continue to have this discussion, I've now been out there 3 times for ride-alongs with the police. I've been out there now at least 2 times for training, plus just other times when you walk around the public safety building being emerged in the public safety setting. If you are sitting at this, in this leadership position, I'm begging you to please go and immerse yourself into the public safety department. There are some things that I feel like you cannot fake. And when you're there for hours upon hours, you just, good teamwork and a good, I'm sorry, I'm losing it. A good sense of pride in the department. Those things cannot be faked, and they are very much present. So it'd be a lot, I guess, the conversation, I would have a little bit more respect for the conversation if everyone could say that they've been out and immersed themselves with our public safety employees. So again, I don't think it's any surprise. I'm not for any of this, but if we were going to dip into emergency reserves, there should be a good reason to do so, and that would be actual data, to show what we need.
Councilor Ganfield.
Mr. Mayor, I guess I would point out a couple different things. We, in part, are making this decision because of the absence of data. We have the ISO rating in support of fire services and things of that nature, but there really isn't a data-driven rating entity for our emergency medical services response. And I'm concerned about it being something that we should look at as one of those blind spots potentially. I also have been out for ride-alongs and am getting firsthand information from those folks on the ground, both in our city and in the county. So I do want to share that I very much am on board. I don't appreciate the insinuation that anytime we talk about questions around public safety that there's some sentiment of we're decrying that we're unsafe or that we have to do dismantling some model. This is sincerely an investigation to make sure that our community is the safest one out there and that we can set the bar and create a model that others might follow. I'll sing the praises of our public safety officers. I actually emailed Acting Chief Howard this week and shared with Director Birdie on the way in. I happened to be right next to a gentleman at dinner who happened to become unresponsive. His teenage son, very flustered, called 911, and within minutes, PSO was there to de-escalate, maintain decorum and respect for this individual. Everyone in the situation, myself included, felt better for having our excellent PSOs respond. We also had Mercy One and Cedar Falls Fire respond. That was a wonderful outcome. He was all right. He got the medical care that he needed. But if we had 2 or 3 of those incidents in our town, I don't know that we'd be covered for that third individual. And heaven forbid that they would have to wait for 20 minutes when you don't have that time in an emergency situation. So I'd love the data. I want to find the data to say that we have exactly what we need. And that's my push for this analysis. There's no vendetta. There's no dismantling intention. Again, it is not a solution in search of a problem. It is simply a second opinion. And to Councilman Sires' earlier point, any good business should not get upset about questions. If I have a good product and it's a great product, when you ask me to clarify on that product, I'm happy to show you all of the data. I don't understand why the resistance to taking a look at this and making sure that Cedar Falls is setting the bar for excellence.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Schultz.
Director Birdie, do you know off the top of your head how many EMS response calls you had in 2021?
I do not. It's, probably 1,800, 2,000.
2,000.
And of course, there's really 2 numbers, EMS calls in the city and calls that our fire department helps with. So there's 2 different numbers. That's why I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Rogers, how many grievances or lawsuits or complaints have you fielded from those calls from 2021? Okay. Curious.
Okay. With the fact that we will be looking for a motion tonight, I would also like to open it up to the public if there's anyone who'd like to speak on this tonight. Yes, Ms. Smith, name and address for the record, please.
Oh my gosh, I wasn't sure I'd get to speak tonight. Whitney Smith, I live on Hawthorne Drive in Cedar Falls. Obviously, I've been one of those people who's been pushing for this. And actually, this is something that I asked for back in, I want to say it was 2019. I also asked for it in 2020, right before all of this happened. And here's the deal, guys.
Please keep your comments.
Okay, I'm sorry. Here's the deal. I keep hearing that this issue keeps causing division. What is this thing going to keep costing in division over, can't we just take this one action that's going to bring everybody together in the city? If I'm wrong, I'll eat my words. I'll come up here and apologize as much as I can. The thing is I want somebody who's unbiased to come in and tell us, hey, they're actually doing really great. I love it. Or maybe there's some things to work on. What they have going is good. Here's some things that we can do. I'm not looking to have anybody fired. I'm thankful that there are people there to respond. So my whole thing is, can we just do something to bring everyone together, get everybody on the same page and say, hey, look, here is the data. Because every time I've asked for data, I'm not getting it. And then when I put together my own numbers, I'm told I'm wrong. So help me out here. Where's the transparency, guys? We're better than this, and that's my biggest thing is I want to see this. I also want to bring up, I've done just minimal research. There's a city in Michigan, Chelsea, Michigan, who had an incident with their police in 2020 in response to Black Lives Matters and a demonstration. The city ended up hiring a law firm out of Massachusetts, I believe. They spent, I think, $4,000 for that person to come in and review the incident and tell the city what they found. Then they also recommended an audit of the police department. That audit cost $35,000. So $39,000 is a far cry from $125,000. If I'm going to renovate my home, I'm going to have somebody come in and give me an estimate before I start crying about the cost of it, because I don't even know. So I guess, can't we start with the estimates? Can't we just call these companies and say, hey, what is your scope here? What are things that you guys offer? And maybe we can go through a checklist and say, yep, we want you look at this for us and this for us. I mean, we're kind of on a blank slate here, and we're shutting it down before we even get any answers. So that's what I have to say. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anyone else wish to speak from the gallery tonight? Okay, seeing none, bring it back to the council. Councilmember Ganf, or sorry, Councilmember Harding.
Canfield.
It was close.
Yeah, you were one off. So, this is, I think this goes deeper than just looking at the data. For me, thinking about this, it goes to unifying a council. It goes to proving that we are willing to take the extra step, because there are still people out there, whether for or against, that are just confused. It's never a bad thing. We use consulting firms and reviews for almost everything in the entire city, and zoning, everything. There's nothing wrong with doing this to build trust, to unify a council, and to move forward with a common good. And so I think something like this, if we want to step forward and look forward, this is what's going to really be able to launch us to the future together and united. It's not something that has to be viewed negatively. So I think looking at where our funding option is, not necessarily putting a number on it, and then going to seeing what companies we could look at and what the scope could then be, and continuing down this path is going to do great things, and it's going to push the city forward. God forbid something did happen and we didn't do this. To me, I think I will say we're safe. I love the public safety system as far as the officers and the people that they put in. It's been such a divisive political thing that if something does happen, even if it's not the fault of the public safety, the media will take it there. It will be spun. This is a check and a balance that we can do to prove that we have done our due diligence up here. We can see where we're at, and we can unify the city. So I only think there can be positive things to come out of this, and pushing it back to November is just going to cause more time. Let's just go for it.
I feel like I've heard from everyone. I don't think I've actually heard from you, Darrell, yet. So, Councilor Cruz, have you spoken yet? 'Cause I don't think you have. So
Well, I've spoken a little bit, but I wanted to clarify a detail. When is the employee survey scheduled to be done?
Well, in goal setting this last year, it was talked about doing it in FY '23. So for us, that was July 1st. So that's when we were going to plan on
A few months
doing
away.
it. Yep.
So January 2nd, we're going to start? Or what? I mean, will it be something, and then how long it's going to take, and then get the information from that so that somebody coming in could use?
Well, our hope is that we would want to do an employee survey, even excluding this discussion. We would want to start right away, so that if there's things to talk about in goal setting, or if there was things to talk about that we wanted to budget for the next year, whatever that is. So that's why I'm saying we would probably do it in the beginning part of the fiscal year, July, August, September. We would want to do it.
So the time frame's 6-8 weeks of surveying the employees, and then analyzing the data to present to staff, planning.
Yeah, probably.
committee of
Yeah,
the whole,
I'm just
and then-
kind of thinking about like when we did our compensation study, 4 years ago, and we had every employee fill out a JDQ, that kind of thing. So yeah, it probably is in that 6-week maybe time frame.
And the whole process before we can get it to committee of the whole would be 3 months, 4 months?
I think that'd be fair.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, just a moment. I would just add, too, with the survey, I would expect that a reputable company that's going to be coming in as a consultant would be having their own battery of survey questions to add in. And so when I was envisioning, and for the discussions we've had for the workplace climate audit, I was thinking that was more broad brush. You could have the exact same kind of survey at UNI or at CFU. It's the fact that we're getting an external company to help us get that data so employees feel more comfortable. In this case, boy, I wouldn't want to just leave it to the internal study to be able to ask some very detailed industry-specific questions of our public safety officers. So I wouldn't use that as, okay, we're going to do this, so we don't need to work on this forward. I mean, it's just my opinion.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Cyrus, go first.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with both you and Simon. For an outside source to come in and be completely just find the facts, just the facts, just like the old Dragnet show. That's what we truly need, and I think people will be much more comfortable with outside agency coming in and asking them questions and know that there would be no retaliation, not that there would be. But that's the people we need to come in and ask these tough questions, and they'll figure out and get the facts, and that's all I want. I just want the facts.
Okay. Councilor Cruz.
So my understanding or my hope would be the employee survey would be done by somebody outside of the city?
Correct.
Right, so it's not going to be an internal, like I was thinking that's what you were saying there, but maybe I misunderstood. So if we have an outside employee survey, workplace audit, whatever we want to call it, I still go back to the idea that even myself as a financial planner, if somebody comes to me and they want an analysis done, I need to know what they want me to look at. Your insurance products, your retirement, your tax, and so on. So the chicken and the egg, to me, the thing is the scope needs to be more vetted to know, and then the facts of what are we going to look for? Facts of everything? The meaning of life? What are we looking at?
Sure, and I think that for tonight, and since we've got hopefully about 10 minutes left on this, I would want to see a motion going forward so we have something to discuss and vote up or down. My sense is what we're looking at for this decision is do we even move forward with dollar figure or not? Is the council willing to commit some amount of money to having an external study? If not, then
Question.
it's dead.
Do we, with a motion, and maybe this is for Kevin, do we even have to put a dollar amount on it? We can just say that we motion to move forward with finding a firm and utilizing the, looking at how much it would cost and utilizing the emergency fund, correct?
Right. It depends upon how much direction you want to give to staff if it takes the next step. If council approves whatever appropriate proposal comes forward, I don't know, Director Rodenbeck might want a top end of that, but I'm not sure.
Well, point of order, Mr. Mayor. The motion that was approved by council was to continue and have these firms analyzed by the committee of the whole. And then from that meeting, I presume on that agenda, we could set an RFP of sorts. So we would be in charge of the scope that we would be sending out to these agencies. This next scheduled committee of the whole that will accomplish the previously approved motion should include that referral. Should include who those entities may be, a discussion amongst council of what questions we do want answered, and then an RFP, a request for proposal to be sent out to certain firms. I think that's the direction we take if you're looking for another motion on top of that.
Well, we have no motions here tonight on the floor, right? So
Well, the previous referral is uncompleted, I guess is what I was getting a point of order on.
And that's to have the
discussion of the
firms themselves and up to 125,000 of identifying the funding sources.
Yeah.
So could we separate that out cleanly tonight and first go for funding sources, make that decision, and then if we decide something else happens, you didn't even go forward with it, you haven't lost anything, but you've committed the council with a majority vote to do something.
That makes sense.
So that's how I'd look for it. We don't have to set the dollar amount. Yes, Councilmember Schultz.
So, Mr. Mayor, before we move forward with the financing, I would say that the folks I've talked to, the citizens I've talked to, the firefighters, the police, in the public safety model that we have, I'm always trying to find some middle ground. And there's some things about the finances that I'll talk about, but the CPAT versus the Cooper test. If it's not that big a deal, I think we ought to push to have the CPAT. Also on promotions and review, there's common consideration that we go to an external board with that. And the big thing that I continue to talk about is if we have a separate fire and a separate police, or if we have the public safety model, we need to staff the North Cedar Fire Station.
I'd have to call a point of order for that because it's just not part of what we're talking about tonight.
Okay.
It's not.
Well, then in finances, excuse me. So in finances, I'm with who's ever talked about putting this in goal setting that I know there's been other things that we've taken out of emergency reserves, but I would not consider this and that, and I certainly don't want to take away from a position that we're trying to make sure that we're properly staffed. And I don't know, maybe Jennifer, you can tell us, is there anything in contingency right now that we'd have to consider with that for the 60,000 in contingency?
Sure. Well, our fiscal year hasn't started yet, so it doesn't start till July 1st. So, in terms of what's been spent on the contingency, we wouldn't know yet because this year hasn't started. I was just giving you examples earlier of things that I know we have used it in the past for, like the runoff elections, like come out legal fees.
Could you tell us when you anticipate, since Ron isn't here, or Mr. Mayor, when goal setting would be for coming up next?
So this year, since we don't have an election, it would be in November.
Right.
So like early to mid-November.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
One little final, I guess, push, even though I don't know that I'm, so I want a reminder, I did vote yes for this conversation, so I'm not afraid of this conversation. My thing is we keep pushing that, I strongly believe that the majority of citizens do feel like we are in a good position, especially when we sit there and tear apart a budget to remove whatever little amount of money we moved. And if we didn't have this model in place, there would be significant tax increases to folks. And people can say the contrary. But again, if you look at other cities and you have that traditional model, it's much more costly than what this model is. And that is why councils upon councils, not just this council, not just the council before, years of councils voted yes. They might not have agreed on anything else. They might not have agreed on roundabouts or anything, but they agreed on this model. And to me, that speaks volumes. I'm not afraid of spending money when money is needing to be spent. I can think of lots of things an emergency reserve poll would be more appropriate on, including the current child care crisis we are in our community. Until there's a reason to spend $125,000 up to of citizens, all citizens in Cedar Falls taxpayer money, we're having the conversation, and so far, other than the what if something happens, guess what, folks? Something's going to happen. I mean, you look all around our state and our country, things happen. That's why you have emergency responders, but sometimes things happen, so we got to stop perpetuating that. When something does happen and all of a sudden it's somebody's fault, when things happen. So we got to stop saying that. I guess I just, if there is a reason, I'd be okay with it. But there's not a reason that I feel has been shown other than, we want to just make sure. Well, I don't know that that's a great reason to spend a significant amount of taxpayer money.
Okay, I feel like we've heard from
got
all
one-
the points.
I
I
have one-
really need to move us forward.
I
so
have one
please.
really quick question from the
Okay.
contingency. Jennifer, have we used up last year's contingency? Close. Okay, and then typically, do we use the 60,000 every year?
Yeah,
Pretty
I
much
would say
always?
that actually most years we use
Okay,
it.
so it doesn't sound like a good source to rely on, so.
Okay, so at this point, with just a few minutes left, I will ask for a motion. If there's no motion at all, then I'm considering the conversation dropped and there will be no study.
Mr. Mayor?
What is the motion on the floor?
Mr. Mayor, may I make a motion?
Please.
I make a motion that we move this conversation or leave this conversation until we can have a discussion at goal setting as to where, when we have a fresh start on a budget, where sources of the money, because that's the point of tonight's conversation, is where would we get the money?
Okay.
So I move that we move this conversation to happen again at goal setting.
Okay, so it's been motioned. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. Any further discussion on moving this to goal setting?
I guess, Mr. Mayor, I'm just concerned as to moving this to goal setting does not accomplish the original referral of having a presentation of consulting firms at a committee of the whole. We haven't seen or discussed any different options. We don't know about the cost of those potentials. This was a two-part referral. We've only accomplished half of it. So to officially table it till goal setting, I don't think is appropriate. I think we need to have a committee of the whole meeting or whatever the standing committee that oversees this is at that time to go through these potential firms and discuss what questions we want to have answered and whether or not we decide from that meeting to have an RFP. But to just declare the discussion done is concerning to me.
Well,
I feel like this would be the equivalent of a tabling, basically. That we're not saying we don't want to have the conversation, but that it's happening down the road. Mr. Rogers, would that be the more appropriate way to do is to table the discussion?
Well, I'll back up.
Is this out of order?
The referral is council's, and now the action item is before council, and so it's perfectly appropriate for council to act on the action item at this time. So, what council, if it passes this motion, would be to keep this idea in mind for goal setting. But it's not inconsistent with the referral because council never discussed specifically the action item to be acted on. So that's what you're doing tonight. So it's not inconsistent.
Should we, to be in compliance with Robert's rules, should we consider this or have this withdrawn and brought up as a tabling formally? Or does the intent still apply?
I think the intent is clear.
Okay.
And it's council's decision at this point.
Yep. So if it is going to be a tabling, then the rules are just majority, correct?
Right.
Okay. And that's not open to debate.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
Right. So I'm going to apply, just keep in mind, I'm going to apply this as Robert's rules for the tabling, not allowing debate. And I think that's important for us to follow that intent.
Point of clarity, point of information. At one point, we used the words indefinite postpone, and then I think, Mr. Mayor, you thought that that was incorrectly used, that we should be using tabling?
No, I said to postpone to a certain date is the way to go forward. So that's what we would be doing here. Okay, point taken. Yeah,
Table versus indefinite.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a tabling, it'd be an indefinite postpone.
you're postponing it to goal setting.
Goal setting, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really good point.
So
The other trouble with tabling is there's got to be a motion removed from the table, and there's a tight timeline on that.
Okay.
That's a way to effectively kill it. So I don't think that's what we have in mind here.
Okay, so this would be the equivalent of postponing to goal setting.
Exactly.
For the sake of cleanliness, could you withdraw and then bring it as the motion to postpone to goal setting?
Sure. I withdraw.
Okay.
And then, Mr. Mayor, may I move to postpone this discussion to goal-setting session,
Of 2022.
2022?
Okay, great. So is there a second?
I think Gil seconded it.
Motion seconded. Okay, now postponing, is there a debate on postponement?
There is.
Okay, great. So have at it. Who would like to speak? Councilmember DeBoer?
Well, I guess to Dustin's question, I think it gives us the opportunity to hear from the employee survey as to what they felt needed work on, and it also would let us hear from police chief, fire chief, director as to what they wanted out of a survey or an audit if we did one.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
It's going to be important information that we get from the survey, but I think once we start talking about the scope of what, if we eventually go with this, it's a different animal. It's an outside view of what the model is.
Okay, that's a good point.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilor Cyrus.
I believe that's the important thing, is to get an outside view of this, and to just push it down the road makes no sense. I think we should move forward right now and have it done by an outside source so we get the facts.
Okay, so what's on is whether we just have it now or have the discussion now or have it in goal setting. So with that, any other final pros, cons, questions? Okay, seeing none, then it's been motioned and seconded to postpone this discussion to goal setting 2022. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so show of hands for aye. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nay. 1, 2, 3. So this is postponed until goal setting, at which point that will be a publicly viewable discussion will incur in November of 2022. So this will not be up for discussion again until that time, unless council brings it forward. So with that, that's our final item tonight, and I will adjourn us until probably 7:05. I know Denny needs a few minutes to get reset, so we'll plan to see you in about 5 minutes again. We are adjourned.